going to draw a polar bear using this photograph, a charcoal pencil, a stick of charcoal, and even a little bit of white chalk. I might even use a tissue today. When I draw something from a photograph, I make sure that I break it down into simple shapes first so that I know where it'll go on my page. So the first step will be to look at the picture and try to find simple shapes. This looks like a big oval to me, so I'm going to make sure that I draw a big oval first, just to know where my polar bear will go. So I will lightly press down on my page until I feel like that's about as big as I want my polar bear to be. Takes up a pretty good amount of the page. Then I'm going to show this as a rectangle because that's the shape it looks like to me, and it's also connected to that first shape that I drew. So I will draw that just about here, and I'm really just barely pressing down with my charcoal pencil so that I'm seeing another shape here, so that I don't have it too dark because I'm going to have to change it a little bit. When I do press down really hard, it'll look much darker like that. So I'm noticing there's also a little shape here that comes out, and that looks more like a rectangle to me. That's his nose. That's going to come out like that. And now I have it all broken down into simple shapes. I may even want to just show this line here that goes like a mountain of snow, just so I have a place for my polar bear to sit. Now I'm going to start drawing the line that goes around his hump and try to make it just like it is on here. So it goes up, and then it starts to bend slightly right here. Then I start to go up again. It curves down. It keeps going straight. Then there's a little line down here, so I'm going to go down a little bit. It comes straight again, so I go straight. It curves in like a little W almost, in and then back out. And then I see his mouth curves in like this. It's sort of like a C shape here, so I'll draw that. And then the bottom of his mouth comes out and sort of blends in with the rest here. The back of his body is actually just barely visible behind his mouth because his head is turned the other way. He's turning his whole neck around. So I'm going to draw it just the way I see it. It seems a little awkward that his head would be there, but it actually is just the way it looks here. So I'm going to trust the photograph. Then there's another shape here, that's his leg. I'm going to draw that just with another rectangle. I forgot to do that before. Now I want to show his ear, so I'll just draw that in. It looks like it's actually about halfway between the edge of his body here and his mouth, so that's why I'm putting it right here. I'm just copying what I see on the page. It's got a dark dot shape in the middle. We practice dots by just filling in shapes. That's sort of an organic one. The mouth has also got a big dot colored in shape, just like this, with almost like foam coming out. I just won't color in the part that looks like it's white. It's also really dark up here on his nose, or his mouth. So I'll shade that in a little bit. There's an eyeball here, and I only see one of the polar bear's eyes in the photograph, so that's the only one I'm going to draw. There's also a very hint of light on his eyeball, so there's one little spot that I won't color in. And now I'm going to try to draw this line here a little bit more, and also his leg, as well as this line of his body. If this is hard to draw, you can actually look at this shape and try to draw that shape instead. Then I see some of his claws. I can actually see where it's dark, so I'll draw those. And I'm noticing it's a little bit rougher here and darker, so now I'm going to start going around and shading things where they look darker on the picture. Behind his ear there's some scrubby little dark areas, so I'll use my pencil to dab around to get those. Even down here by his foot is pretty dark. I might do some little lines to make it look like fur. It's also pretty dark over here. It's darker than the rest of him, so I'm going to color that in a little bit. I also see a line behind the polar bear. That's a horizon line. It separates the land from the sky, so I'll just do a nice line that goes behind him. And I'm going to also just tighten up this part of his mouth because I don't really quite like what I've got so far. So I'm going to do a little line like that. And maybe a few more lines around his eye. Now that I have that all set, I'm going to do a few more little marks for his hair. I'm going to go in with this charcoal pencil. Anything in my photograph that is darker than white, I'm going to use my charcoal pencil. Even the whole polar bear, which you'd think would be white, is darker than the sky. So I'm actually going to shade the whole polar bear and the ground around the polar bear lightly with this charcoal stick. So I've put my pencil down and now I'm using the stick of charcoal. And I'm going to just lightly color on top of this, and it may look kind of scary right now, but now after I do this, as well as the background, I can turn it on its side and just pull it along to fill an area in quickly. Now I can use a tissue, or I could use my fingers to smudge it. I'm going to use a tissue just to make it nice and soft looking and to blend it a little bit. I want my polar bear to be really smooth, so the more circular motions, the more this will look blended. And if you can still see the lines, I can go back in there and just add a little bit more charcoal lightly. I'm really barely pressing down just to lightly get it in there. In there is a nice polar bear. And I'll scrub it over here too. Now there are parts of my polar bear that are lighter than other parts, so I'm not going to be finished with it quite yet. Now I can use my chalk that I mentioned before to add highlights. Highlights are where you add a little white to show there's light hitting it. For example, up around the ear, you can see there's light shining around. So I'm going to color that a little bit more white with my chalk. And then I'm going to even put some here because I see some. This little part of the polar bear also looks a little brighter to me. So I might blend a little bit of chalk in that area. I could even add a little bit of chalk all down his arm here where it looks lighter. This side looks lighter than this side. That's why I'm only doing this side. The top of his rump looks a little bit lighter, so I'm going to color that in. If I press harder, it'll get even whiter. Now I'm going to see that this part of his leg looks lighter too, so I'll even add a little bit there. That's because the light is hitting the polar bear along his leg. I'm going to get this area because it looks lighter. Even his belly has a couple of little light spots. Now, I'd like this part a little bit lighter. His mouth has that big white area, sort of like foaming at the lip. I'm going to add that. The glimmer in his eye I'm going to add. And maybe even a few little marks around his face to make it look like hair. Now I can actually blend it again with my finger or my tissue if I want to make this all look a little bit more smooth. Once I'm satisfied, I might go back in and change a few things. I might even add some white on the snow where the snow looks a little bit lighter along here and along here. It might make the snow look like it's in front of the polar bear if I lighten it up a little bit. So I'm going to do that. The harder I press, the whiter it gets. So I kind of want to whiten this up a lot. And now the sky is also, I just blew on it to get that off. The sky is also a lot brighter, so I may even go in with my white chalk and lighten the sky up and go around the outline of my polar bear a little more. Then I'm going to have a lot of contrast between my polar bear and the sky. So I'm just rubbing my chalk along the paper. When I blow it clean, and maybe I'll go back in and add a few more details, but for the most part, my polar bear is finished.